Hello everyone. In this video, which I hope will be rather short, especially after the last one, I want to show you the debugger. Now that's a tool that every web developer knows how to use, and it's really indispensable. And what developers use it for is to find bugs in their code. There's always going to be bugs, and if you don't know what bugs are, they're errors in your code, and they cause your program to not work properly. So no matter how good you are at programming, you're going to put bugs by mistake in your code. And a debugger is a tool that you can use to find those bugs. Okay. Now I don't know if we're ready to really start learning the ins and outs of the debugger at this point in your journey into programming. But I want to show it to you because it's also a great tool for you to understand how your code executes. Okay, so here's what we're going to do to get started. Now, the first thing you have to do is set what we call a breakpoint. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here. Now, this is the code that we wrote in the last video when we were talking about functions. So if you remember, we wrote a function or declared a function called say hello. So that's what we're doing here. And then also, after we declared it, we actually called it 2 times right down here. Okay, so what I want to do is put a new line right before the first call to say hello right here. And we're going to put a real quick one-word statement in here. Type in debugger and semicolon. Okay, now what this is going to do is when we run this page in the browser and our code begins to execute, it's going to start at the top and then it's going to just move from the top down. Once it hits this statement right here, it's going to start the debugging tool. Okay, so this is what we call setting a breakpoint. This is the point at which your program stops executing, so it breaks out of its normal execution, and then we can observe everything that it does in the debugger. I'll show you what I mean right here. I'm going to go ahead and save my change. And then I'm going to open this page in the browser right here like so. Okay, now the debugger will not work unless you have the developer tools open. So I'm going to go ahead and press F12 to open the developer tools. And now look at what happens when I refresh the page. It'll hit that breakpoint. So if I refresh here, there we go. Look at, I don't know if you can see this. Can I make this bigger? I'm going to see if I can make this bigger for you here. Yeah, I can make it bigger. Okay, I'll make it real nice and big so you can see it, and I'll kind of rearrange some things right here. But what's going on here is our program started to execute. So as the page loads in the browser just interprets the page, the code in the page from the top to the bottom. Once it gets to this line, then it starts our debugger. So this right here that we're looking at, this is the debugger that's built into the browser. Now, there's other types of debuggers for other languages too, and they might look a little bit different, but they really have the same principles. And so the stuff that I show you here could be applied to a debugger that you might use in C# or Python or another programming language. Okay, so what happened is our program stopped executing once it hit our breakpoint, this debugger statement right here. So what this allows me to do is I can step through the code line by line. Now that's super helpful because as a program executes, it could execute 1,000 lines of code in like a split second. So what this does is it allows us to stop the execution of the code and we can see it execute line by line. Let me show you what I mean right here. I'm going to go back to the console tab real quick and just clear it. Okay, I'm going to clear out the console, and then the debugger is over here in the sources tab. I don't know why this tab doesn't say debugger, but I feel like it should say debugger because that's what it is right here. Okay, so I cleared out the console, and then what I want to show you right here is there's these buttons up here, and these are the ones that we use to control the debugger. So the first button that I want to show you is this one. It's called a step over button. So as you can see, it's like a little arrow stepping over a dot. So if I hit that button, my program is going to move down to the next line. Did you see what happened? It moved from our breakpoint down to say hello. Okay, and then I do also want to point out that my console log is empty at this time. So if I go back to the console log, I'll see there's nothing in it. Okay, so if I go back over to the debugger, which is the sources tab, and I press the step over line again, okay, now look at what it did. It executed this line of code, and then now it stopped at the next line, and it's waiting for us to step through the code with the debugger again. So it's just executing line by line, so we're really slowing down the execution of the program right here. If I look in the console, I should see my console logs. Here's my 3 console logs, and that's because the function that we just stepped over, that's what it did. So okay, so you can hit the step over button to move from one line to the next, and it will just execute your code as you step through each line. Okay, if I go back to the sources tab right here, this time what I'm going to do, so we called say hello 2 times right here. Okay, the first time we called it right up here, I stepped over it. This time when we call it, I'm actually going to use another button right over here, which is step into. Okay, so if you're frozen on a line of code that's calling a function, right here we can say this is a function call to say hello. If your debugger is frozen on that line, then, and it happens to be a function call, like what we're doing right here, calling a function, then you can step into it and watch the code in the body of the function execute. Okay, so here I'm going to press the step into button, which is this arrow right here that's pointing down. And look at what happens when I do this. There we go. It's actually executing the statements that are inside the body of our function. Okay, so now, and by the way, the line that's selected, it hasn't yet executed. So I have to either step over that line or step into it to execute it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to step over it, and that takes us to the next line down. And now I'm going to go look in the console. So there we go. There's the line that we were just stepped over. Okay, let me go back over to the sources tab, and now our debugger is frozen on this line right here. It's about to execute this line of code. I'm going to go ahead and step over it. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to the console to show you that we'll see that entry in the log. There it is, hello world right there. So hopefully you can see what a valuable tool this is, because as I mentioned, when a program runs, it can execute millions of lines of code in just a heartbeat. So we can really slow it down and see line by line what's happening right here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and step over that. And now sometimes you end up, it stops on lines in kind of weird places, but here's where it is. That's the end of our say hello function. I'm going to step over it again. Okay, and now look at what happens. It jumps down. Here's what the next thing our program does is it's about to call our convert to Fahrenheit. Okay, now this is interesting. If I were to step over this, it's going to go ahead and just execute all the lines of code inside of our function, and we would get the result back right here in F1, and it would jump down to the next line. I'm actually going to step over this call to convert to Fahrenheit right now. So I'm going to hit the step over button. Okay, and now watch this. Here's a really cool thing about the debugger is if you've got variables in play in your program, like F1 right here, you can hover over it, and it will show you what the value is that variable is storing. Okay, so what we did on that line, the previous line from where we are now, is we called convert to Fahrenheit, and we passed in a parameter of 10, and it returned a value of 50. So we converted 10 degrees Celsius into 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, all right, so we stepped over that line of code. This time when we call convert to Fahrenheit, I'm going to step into it so that we can see how our program executes. So even though the browser, when it loads your code, it runs from top to bottom, the true execution of the code is it jumps around a lot, because as you'll see in a second here, when I step into this function call to convert to Fahrenheit, it's going to jump up to here, and we're going to see the body of that function in action as each line executes. So here I'm going to go ahead and step into this line of code. And I'll look at where it took me. It's up here. And again, this is pretty cool because I can see that we have a parameter called temp Celsius. If I hover over that, I can see that we passed in 50. So down here, when we called the function, we passed in a parameter of 50. So this time, when I'm calling the function, the parameter is going to be 50. Okay, so now we're on a line of code here. Let me see if I can kind of rearrange this so we can see everything a little bit better here. So now we're frozen on this line of code, and it's about to take the parameter temp Celsius, which is storing 50, and it's going to use it in our expression right here. And then the result of that expression is going to get stored in our temp Fahrenheit variable. Okay, so I'm going to step over this line of code. Okay, now if I hover over temp Fahrenheit right here, I can see that it's 122. Okay, now the next line of code, the one that we're on right now in the debugger, it's about to return that 122, the value that's being stored in temp Fahrenheit. Okay, now watch what happens when I hit step over here. It might take me down to the, okay, that's interesting. It didn't take me down to the bottom of curly brace like it did previously. Okay, but our program jumps back to where it was right before we called convert to Fahrenheit. Okay, and now our program is about to console log F1. I'll go ahead and step over this line of code. And then I'll go back to the console, and there it is. That was, we converted 10 in Celsius to 50 in Fahrenheit. Okay, and now I'm going to jump back to the debugger or the sources tab here, and we're about to execute the next line of code right here, and it's going to console log whatever F2 is. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea. This is a really great tool that I like to show beginners. We use it more in the advanced classes, but this is a great tool so that you can observe the way the code executes in your program. So you can see that things jump around. If you get to a line that has a function call, then it's when you step into it, it's going to take you to the body of that function, and you can see those statements executing. Okay, it's also really nice to be able to hover over things and see what the variables are storing. Like right here, F1 is storing 50, F2 is storing 122, and so on and so forth. Now, there's a lot more to the debugger. It has a lot more features than what I'm showing you here, but I just want to show it to you so you can see the way your programs execute. Okay, now we've got more code coming up in my program. As I scroll down here, I can see that we've declared another function, and then we're going to call that function a few more times. So we could go ahead and step through all the rest of the code that's in this program, but I think we're done right now. So if you're done with the debugger and you just want the program to finish running out, you can press this resume button right here, which looks like a play button. Okay, then it's just going to execute all the lines, and bam, it's done executing everything. So now our program is done running. Okay, now one thing I do want to show you here is you should go back to your code when you're done with the debugger and get rid of the breakpoint that you added right there. So that I'm just going to go ahead and remove that debugger statement. Okay, I encourage you to play around with the debugger because every programmer is going to need to know how to use it eventually. It's a little bit too soon for us to really get into all the details of it right now. But I just wanted to show it to you so you can at least know how to watch and observe how your code executes, how the statements execute. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions about the debugger. We'll probably be using it in class every now and then too.